So thank you again all for joining. I'm just delighted that you're able to join me today for this session and for the work that we're going to be doing together today. Please do use the text box, and if anyone has any questions, please do put the questions in as we're going along. And in the 10 minutes that we have at the end of this session, we will come back to those questions. Today we have 5 items to cover off. My intent is to cover off the content in 20 minutes to give us a few minutes for a Q&A session. I'll start with just a quick overview about effective managers, the situation that we find managers in today, and then move on to talk about the research that we've discovered around accountability, and then finally the question and answer that we were talking about. In terms of effective managers, we are a specialized firm. We focus very much on the productivity and profitability that is tied to the effectiveness of managers. The most important relationships that employees have is the manager, because if you think about it, the manager is the key relationship between the employee and the organization. The manager is the person that delegates, that assigns resources, that gives feedback, that does the coaching. So it is a critically important relationship in the organization. And yet not a lot is understood in really grounded research. So Effective Managers has been looking into that area, because it really does matter. We find that from other people's research that 70% of employees leave a job for reasons that are related to factors that are directly controllable by their managers. And also that work groups that are ineffectively managed are 50% less productive and 44% less profitable. So it becomes really important that managers be aware of and involved in the work that they need to do. In terms of the research that Effective Managers carried out, it started with this question, and this is a question that has bothered me as a manager and as a management consultant. Why do your best managers go home every night with a full briefcase, feeling badly about what they didn't get done that day, instead of feeling good about what they did get done? So that prompted the research. We partnered with Telfer School of Management at the University of Ottawa. We started the research in 2012, and we wrapped it up at the end of 2013. So I'd like to share with you, top of mind, some of the findings that we had. The first is with respect to the actual quantification of the effectiveness of managers. So managers tell us that they spend 20% of their time doing things they weren't hired to do, and 26% of their time on support work that could be delegated to a qualified support staff. So that's 46% of a manager's time over 2 days a week are spent on things that are not effective in terms of the work that managers need to do in their organization. And not surprisingly, the key relationship, the highest correlated factor in terms of measures that are related to managers' effectiveness is accountability. It's extraordinarily highly correlated. If you look at accountability and this relationship to manager effectiveness, it's a correlation of 0.74. Now, in a lot of scientific research, if you can getting correlations in the area of 0.2 or 0.3 or even 0.4, you think you're doing very, very well. So a correlation of 0 is no relationship. A correlation of 1 is a perfect relationship. So if you see 0.74, it does show you that accountability is a very significant factor in terms of a manager's effectiveness in the workplace. What surprised me a lot as I did the reading leading up to the research was that I had a perception that accountability was something that would be a critical factor. I was not able to find a standard agreed upon definition of accountability. In fact, I only found 3 or 4 other researchers that were looking in the area of accountability at all, and each of them had their own definition for accountability. Imagine if you were a chef and trying to replicate a recipe without standard measures in terms of teaspoons and cups and so on, or if you're an engineer trying to build a building and you don't have standard agreement in terms of what definitions are of various terms. So in management sciences, it behooves us to get more serious around what are some of the standard definitions so that when we're having discussions with each other, we can understand what we mean and what we intend by the thoughts that we have. So this is the working definition that we have based on a conglomerate of dictionary definitions and my own understanding of the concept. Accountability is an obligation for which one can be held to account for one's results and one's actions by a specified other. So there are three elements here that are really critically important. The first is that there's an obligation. So the individual feels that they have an obligation with respect to something that needs to be done. The second is that this idea of being called to account for results and actions. So results are important, but also how the results are obtained are important. So results and actions are both aspects of this definition. And then the third is the concept of a specified other, so some other external person that has the authority to call the individual to account. So a point I'd like to make here, though, and just as an aside, almost a footnote, is that accountability is very different from responsibility. In the literature, often there is no distinction made. Sometimes people will try to make shades of gray between the different terms, but they're often used interchangeably. For us, responsibility is very much born from a self-held or an inner-held belief. So one can feel responsible for something, but it's something that they feel that they are responsible for in and of themselves and cannot call to account for that by an external other. So an example of that is as an individual, you're walking down the hallway in your office and you see some litter on the floor. So you feel a responsibility to keep your workplace in good order. You reach over, you pick up the litter, and you drop it in the trash can. So that's an inner held belief, a sense of responsibility to keep your workplace clean. The janitorial services are accountable. They can be called to account for keeping the facility clean. So that is the major difference that I would make there, is that we understand the difference between accountability, which is external and driven by a specified other, and responsibility, which is an inner held belief and is driven by an individual, an individual's own self-held beliefs. So in terms of accountability, then the question becomes, if accountability is so clearly aligned with effectiveness in the workplace, are there dimensions of accountability? And in fact, we did find that there are two different dimensions. One is called clarity of accountability, and the other one is called felt accountability. So what I'll do is talk a bit about this clarity of accountability dimension, and then I'll come back to the felt accountability dimension and tie the two together for you. So in terms of clarity of accountability, this is really important because it leads to clarity of action throughout the workplace. So to the extent that managers throughout the organization, from the CEO down through the vice presidents, directors to frontline managers, have clarity about what they're accountable for, and that accountability clearly links back through their manager to their manager's manager and so on back up to the CEO and the strategic plan, then individuals have a sense of how their work, those things for which they are accountable for, lead back and relate to the strategic plan and therefore the overall success of the organization over time. But in addition, it also relates directly to clarity of interaction, because to the extent from the CEO on down to the front of the organization, everyone has a common understanding of their accountability and how their work relates to others in the organization, then there can be a commonality of purpose and a collegiality around how work is done that can help with the interaction of work that comes across the organization. This interaction is so important that I am coming back to that with a couple of slides in a few minutes. So moving on then to felt accountability. There are all kinds of what I call felt accountabilities that can get in the way of delegated accountability. So if you think about functional managers that are in a different part of the organization, if you think about customers, if you think about colleagues, if you think about projects, there could be self-held beliefs that an individual has, or you could even be thinking about employees. So the issue with this is that if a manager is not clear about the accountability that they're delegating to their direct report managers, then these other felt accountabilities can get in the way. So an individual will feel accountable to the customer, they'll feel accountable to colleagues, or they'll feel accountable to functional managers. Now, that's not to say these aren't important things. You know, responsibility in the workplace is important, customers are important, functional managers are important, but the distinction is that these should not be driven by self-held beliefs. These should be driven in terms of the manager delegating clear accountabilities to their direct reports so that they understand how their work relates to customers, how their work relates to colleagues, how their work relates to their functional managers, and so on. So if we look at these two dimensions, I don't want to get too charty on you here, but I think this is an important one. If we think about those two dimensions, and you look at the relative scores, on the left-hand side is the measure of accountability. Right below it is clarity of accountability, and then below that is felt accountability in the org. Felt accountability scored at 8.7. So on a scale of 0 to 10, most managers agreed with statements with respect to felt accountability. So managers feel accountable for stuff. If this was a school mark, it would be almost an A+. So they really do feel accountable. If you look up and look at the clarity of accountability, the score was 7.1. That's more of a B-. So in terms of the two dimensions of accountability, the felt accountability scored significantly higher. Now, both are correlated with manager effectiveness, so both are important, but managers feel more accountability than they have in terms of understanding or being clear about what they are accountable for. So if we have this strong correlation between felt accountability and clarity of accountability, whether or not the manager sets clear accountabilities, this would tell us that direct reports are going to take on or feel accountable for things. So the question is not whether or not employees are going to feel accountable for doing something, it's whether the manager establishes those accountabilities in a clear way so that managers understand and are clear about what they're accountable for. So I said I would come back to this idea of workflow and how work comes across the organization, and sort of I called it interaction in the workplace. So it's really important that work flows smoothly across the organization, because to the extent that it doesn't, it introduces what I call churn, my highly technical term for the day. So there's churn in the organization around handoffs, around who's doing what when, around who's accountable for what with respect to each other's work, and so on. So in terms of defining churn, I just wanted to give you a quick example. So I've made up here a three-level organization. It's got a CEO, it's got vice presidents, and it's got directors. So if you think of your director of finance over on the left-hand side of your screen, and you position that with your director of operations on the right-hand side of the screen. So consider a situation where the director of finance has to produce a report every Monday morning, excuse me, for the CEO that's going to go to the board. But the director of finance requires the director of operations to provide information to be able to successfully put that report together. So the question then becomes, if that information doesn't arrive one morning and one Monday morning, and the director of finance calls up the director of operations and says, where's that information? What happens when the director of operations says, I'm sorry, we've had an emergency today. My vice president says I must focus in on this and get that solved before I do anything else. So here we have two individuals in the organization. Through no fault of their own, they're in a conflict situation. The director of finance feels very strongly and has clear direction, delegated accountability, if you will, from his or her vice president to have that report ready, but is not able to successfully do the work because of dependence on the director in operations. In a lot of organizations, the solution to this situation is to say, well, you're paid a wage and you're adults, so work it out. when in fact that creates a situation where the two of them have to negotiate, they have to waste time and energy, there's going to be hard feelings, there's conflict that's not necessary. Rather, there needs to be a clear accountability and authority framework for how work flows across the organization so that the CEO is setting context for the vice president of finance, the vice president of operations, and each of them know in turn the importance of this particular report, and it is a pretty simplistic example, but I think a real one, so that when this situation arises, the vice presidents are able to clarify the delegation of accountability and help the organization move forward in a clearer way. So that brings us then to, in terms of some of the findings and some of my interactions with employees and organizations. When you talk in organizations to individuals and ask about issues that they have in the organization, you're not going to get the answer, well, we have a lack of clarity of accountability and authority for how work flows across the organization. I mean, that's just not the way people talk. What they will say, though, is that our organization has silos. So an employee in one part of the organization, if they're not clear about how their work interacts with others, or if they don't have a trusting relationship that work that they depend on from others for them to be successful in their work is going to be available when they need it, the word used is silos. So that other department does their own thing. They don't keep us informed. They're not aware of what our needs are. They don't provide the services that we need when we need them, and so on. So the biggest antidote that I know of to silos in an organization is to create this cross-functional accountability and authority framework so that people understand how work flows across the organization. They understand their relationship with each other and their respective accountabilities with each other. An analogy I like to draw with this one is with respect to traffic in a major urban area. Imagine if there were no rules of the road in the city that's nearest to you. If people had to kind of make it up as they go along, if there were no stoplights and no yield signs and no turn signals on cars, you can imagine that you would have gridlock very quickly, and certainly a lot of accidents, and certainly a lot of hard feelings amongst drivers in terms of who does what when. Well, the same exact thing applies in organizations. If you don't have rules of the road, if everyone has to make it up as they go along, how are you going to have clear understanding about who does what when and how people work together in the organization? The second one I wanted to talk about is clarity of accountability as it with respect to action and delegation of accountability down the organization. The symptom that is expressed in the lack of a clear managerial accountability and authority framework is poor communication. So the sense from an individual manager's perspective is that if they're not clear about what they're accountable for, the result tends to be that either they've done work that wasn't necessary to be done, they've missed a handover point because they weren't aware something was done, or they've done work and someone else in another part of the organization has also done that work, or they're accounting on something from someone and it didn't happen. So the response tends to be, in our organization, we have poor communication. And that reflects that the system for translating strategic objectives from the CEO down through the VPs, down through directors and so on, down to the manager, is not working appropriately, because a really critically important part of each intervening manager's job is to look at those things they're accountable for, figure out what they are able to delegate, and then in terms that are understandable to their direct report managers, be very clear about the things that they're accountable for in their organization. So again, it's not well understood that that this poor communication is in fact an expression of a lack of clarity about what one is accountable for and how one does their work in the organization. So it does then come back to the chief executive officer of the organization. The CEO has 6 key functions, and I will be having a separate webinar in this in the not too different future where we will talk about this key functions of managing, ensuring work is appropriately delegated down the organization, ensuring work flows across the organization, implementing the right organizational design, establishing an effective talent management system, and establishing and managing appropriate support systems. So in terms of the work that we're doing at Effective Managers is we have, based on the research work that we have done, created an Effective Managers survey, which is, whoops, went one bullet too far, sorry there, implemented an Effective Managers survey so that a CEO can use these tools to understand accountability and authority in the workplace, together with the 7 other measures which we haven't even talked about today, and how those relate to accountability and how that then in turn impacts on effectiveness in the workplace. So that has taken me through the 20 minutes. I know I've given you a lot of information. I do have articles on this on the website, so if you would like additional information or to dig a little deeper, please do feel free to cruise around there and see what additional information that you can find. Also, do feel free to follow me on Twitter for daily management tips and other information that you would be able to identify in that way. We will be conducting these 20-minute webinars on a monthly basis going forward. So watch the next newsletter, which will be going out at the end of this month, and we'll have a schedule of upcoming events there. So please do feel free to join us at any time or to pass this information on. So I did say we'd come back for some Q&As. Let me just check my message. So no one has put in any questions in the text box at this point. So let me, we're a small enough group, I can take us off of mute at this point. Oops. And if anyone has any questions that they would like to raise, please do raise them now, and we can have a bit of Q&A over the next few minutes. Kevin, can you do a quick sound check for me just to make sure that we've got, I'm able to hear someone if they're talking?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yep, perfect, thanks. So if anyone does have any questions, that would be great. Oh, I do have one text question here which I can answer. If you were looking to implement a new accountability framework at our company, how would you go about it? Can someone on our senior leadership team besides the CEO spearhead this, hoping to understand logical first steps? Well, thank you. That's an excellent question. I do put a lot on the shoulders of the CEO, because I think the CEO is the only person in the organization that is able to really create the balance between all of the support victims across the organization. But of course, the head of HR, the Chief Human Resources Officer, would have a major role to play in this, and every member of the executive team, in fact, would have a place. So I think between HR and the CEO, the decision to launch a survey to really understand what is the situation, how are managers feeling about effectiveness in their workplace, and what are the key opportunities that for development, and the key strengths on which change can be built are important. So a survey is an assessment tool to really understand the current state of the organization, and then from there it's much easier to design an implementation or a change process to improve effectiveness. Any other comments or questions for this morning? Okay, well, if anything does occur to anyone, please do feel free to email me, and we can correspond by email or set up a Skype if we'd like to talk about any of these issues further. I thank you very much for your time this morning, and appreciate your tuning in, and look forward to hearing from you. So with that, then I will log off for this session, and look forward to seeing you at future ones. Thanks all. Hi, I'm Dwight Mahalitz, President of Effective Managers. Thank you so much for downloading the webinar. I hope that you enjoyed it and will find it useful. Feel free to check out other parts of the website for interesting downloads. Most are free, some are at a nominal charge, but I'm sure you'll find lots of interesting tools there and things that can help you be more effective. And in fact, that's what my job is. My job is to help you, help your organization be higher performing. The bottom line is that I want to start where you are, understand your problem, and provide services that can help you solve that problem and implement a solution as quickly and as effectively and as efficiently as possible. Give me a call, drop me an email. I'd love to hear from you, talk about your situation, and see if there's anything that we can do together. Thank you.